Here we go. It's time to go temple building from the inside out. Many of us know that physical and mental health play a direct part in spiritual health, but we may not know how to bring it all together. Well, here's your host, Desiree Fletcher Carruthers, as we go temple building from the inside out.
Hey everybody, happy Sunday and welcome to KPOG 102.9's Temple Building from the Inside Out. I'm your host, Desiree Fletcher Carruthers. Thanks for joining me, and I know I sound like a broken record, but I know there are new listeners every single week. So, as always, be sure to visit us at kpog.org if you would like to live stream programming from the website, or you can download the app on your smartphone and carry us with you wherever you go. Happy Sunday. It's a rainy Sunday, but boy, I tell you, we needed that rain. Although I'm a little sad because today I was supposed to go on a beehive tour. So the chiropractic clinic that I work for, we adopt a hive. We have adopted a hive at a place called the Holton Homestead. They're kind of like a CSA, community supported agriculture, where they do sell a lot of produce, but they also are beekeepers. And so they allow the community who might be interested in maybe starting a beehive of their own, but they don't know how to get started. Maybe they don't have the space or the resources. And so you can adopt one to help support bees and natural honey in your area. But unfortunately, we were rained out. And so I was kind of bummed about that. But silver lining on it all, I have a good friend of mine here with me today, Dennis Barrett. He is a beekeeper, or an interim beekeeper, as he likes to call himself. And so we are going to get the skinny on bees and what it takes to be a beekeeper and why it might be important to participate in that activity if you can. So if you've ever had interest, tune in, or if you know of somebody who may have had interest in keeping bees or supporting bees, then you're going to want to share this program with them. Of course, you know, temple building from the inside out, I like to focus on nutrition and health properties of different foods. And in fact, I was talking about buying locally sourced veggies and fruits and veggies probably a week or two ago. Yeah, because last week I was talking about quinine on my very brief show, and the week before that talking about eating seasonal vegetables. But I did talk about locally sourced honey at that time. Because, you know, there is a lot of anecdotal information out there about some health benefits of honey, that it can have healing properties, that it can aid with seasonal allergies. Some even say it can reduce the lifespan of a cold by 2 days. So who wouldn't want that? They also say that it can help tame stomach flu. Unfortunately, though, as far as the medical and health community is concerned, there's not a lot of research out there to support these anecdotal claims, but more and more research lately has been conducted. In fact, I was just looking at a study not that long ago that was posted on the National Institute of Health website. The study was called Traditional and Modern Uses of Natural Honey in Human Diseases, a Review. And so some very interesting background there if you guys want to check it out. But it's basically saying that honey has had a place in traditional medicine for centuries, so for a long time. However, it has a limited use in modern medicine due to lack of scientific support, which I've been talking about. But more of that scientific research is coming about today. So for a long time, it has been observed that honey can be used to overcome liver, cardiovascular, and gastrointestinal problems. Even that ancient Egyptians, Assyrians, Chinese, Greeks, and Romans used honey for wounds and diseases of the intestine. Since a few decades ago, honey has been and is currently being subjected to laboratory and clinical investigations by several research groups. And one of the discoveries that those groups are coming up with is that honey has a role with antibacterial properties, or I guess I should say it can provide antibacterial properties. Honey has been reported to have an inhibitory effect on around 60 species of bacteria, some species of fungi, and viruses. Now, when I say this, this is not processed honey. This would be the raw honey that they are researching and finding to have these benefits. So the antioxidant capacity of honey is important, according to these research studies, in many disease conditions, and is due to a wide range of compounds that are found in the honey. So as you can see, research is starting to catch up what I guess people have known for a long time in centuries, but it's not there 100%. So as I say, take a look at the research, but also listen to what others are saying about it anecdotally and start to make conclusions for yourself. But in the meantime, as I said, we have Dennis over here. He's joining us. And so, Dennis, why don't you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about how did you get started or interested in being a beekeeper, and how, I guess I don't know, how do you even get started being a beekeeper?
Well, that's an interesting story, Desiree. My brother actually worked for a farmer in McAllister, Oklahoma. We were living in Oklahoma at that time. All summer, I was away at school or doing something else. I forget what I was doing, but I wasn't there. And this farmer, to my dad's consternation, insisted on partially paying him for his labor with a hive of bees.
Okay.
And Dad was not at all amused. He says, well, we know who's going to take care of those. But my dad became his hobby. I mean, he got into beekeeping quite a bit. And he started buying stuff and boxes and frames, and it just grew from that one hive. And I would help him from time to time and learned a lot about it. Then I went on, got married, didn't really do much with bees for a long time. And as he got sick one year, and he lost his bees and everything. And so he gave me all of his equipment, which sat in my garage for years. And then I ran into a coworker one day who was keeping bees, and we started swapping bee stories. And he lives here just south of town. And so he encouraged me to try to get back into it again. So I brushed it off, and I don't know, that was about 10 years ago. And I started keeping bees. One of the interesting things is you can keep bees in the Des Moines city limits. I researched that before I set up my hive. As long as they don't bother other people, you have to be careful where you put them. And so I have a half an acre. Then I have a son who has another half an acre, and we've been able to keep a hive of bees over on each place without bothering other people.
All right. Well, that's very interesting, because I never would have thought that you could be a beekeeper within city limits. It's always something that you see happening outside of the city. But I guess for individuals who are in the city but yet have an interest in something like that, as you were saying, as long as there is a portion of their yard where it's not going to be, right butted up against their neighbor's fence or something like that, it's a possibility.
Yeah, the city doesn't mind if they chase you around, but if your neighbors complain, they'll come knocking on your door. The risk that you take in keeping bees in town is the pesticides that people use. A lot of the new pesticides are nicotinamide-based pesticides. They and they just drive bees crazy. They mess with their navigational system, and they get lost on the way home, and you'll see bees just wandering around. They don't know where they're going if they've been exposed to some of the newer pesticides.
That makes it tough. And I think, that's probably one of the many reasons why we've been seeing the really big decline in the bee population. I mean, you've got, I guess, just natural habitation no longer being there like it was, environmental concerns like different pesticides, what have you, temperatures, weather, environment, just how, I guess, delicate are bees? How hard is it to maintain a healthy bee hive?
Well, during the summer here in Iowa, that's not all that hard. There are mites. They have parasites that bother there's a gentamicin product that you can buy and put in the hive that tries to keep that down. I've had more luck with taking something like peppermint oil or tea tree oil and mixing it with sugar water. There's a process for doing that because the two don't naturally mix, and that keeps the parasites off of them pretty well. But then you have the insecticide. The issue for me is often the Iowa winters. So to keep that hive viable, they have to be able to keep the queen at 70 degrees in the middle of an Iowa winter in a box setting out in your yard. And they eat the honey, and then they all sit around and flap their wings to make that temperature, to keep that temperature around her at 70 degrees. And then they rotate in and out of this ball that they kind of create around her. So if you run out of honey, if you've robbed them too close, you run out of honey, that can kill them. The other thing is, if it gets too cold, or worse yet, if it gets moist inside the hive, and of course, they're flapping their wings, they're eating honey, and eventually mold will start growing, those kind of things. So I've had a big fight with that. Another one of the pests is a little moth that lives in just about everybody's lawn, that will get in and eat the grubs, eat the honey, eat the wax, create all these webs that the bees get stuck in, and just totally destroy a hive. So there's a lot of tricky things. There's a lot of things against you, but when the bees are healthy, they take care of most of that, and you don't have to do a whole lot as long as they're running good and healthy and strong and have everything they need to eat.
So how many bees do you think you maintained in an active hive at once? Or I guess how many bees do you need to make up a hive? And where do you get your bees? How do you start your beehive? So you had the equipment, but how did you actually get the bees?
Well, there are people that sell bees. My friend locally to the south here has been so successful that he'll have an extra hive to sell. So in the spring, what we typically do, we'll take a strong hive and we'll split it. We'll leave the queen with one half, and we'll make sure that they have fresh eggs with another half, with the other half. So the bees then will feed. If you have an egg that is less than 3 days old, they can feed that egg royal jelly and make it into a queen. So you want to split a hive, that's what we typically do in the spring. Otherwise, they're going to swarm on you about the end of May, sometime in June. You may not get that swarm if it's 50 feet up in a tree, and you lose all that bee power. So that's one way, and so we'll split a hive, and he has so many hives he'll sell you bees, but they're running about $100 to $150 for a 3-pound bunch of bees. That can get you started. You can order bees from various houses. There's one Man Lake up in Minnesota that I've used, and then there's Draper's, I think, out of Sioux Falls or Sioux City, and there's Kelly Bees. So you can order them from these houses as well.
So you've used a couple of terms here. I think you said royal jelly, if I got that right.
Right.
And bee power. So kind of explain to us that are new to this whole bee thing what royal jelly and bee power is, and what royal jelly has to do with making a queen bee.
Well, so bee power to me is just how many bees you have in the hive. The bigger the hive, the more power you have, and they're going to be more successful. Royal jelly is a substance that the bees can make, and so all the bees typically are female. So we'll go here into a little life cycle.
Sure.
So most of the bees in the hive are female. And an unfertilized egg will become a male. So a fertilized egg becomes a female. And then they have to feed it this special jelly to make it fertile. So most of the bees in that hive are infertile female bees, and they're the workers that go around and you see outside the hive all the time. The drone bees, the male bees, we call them drones, just exist for one purpose, and that's when you have a queen ready to mate, that they do their job. They'll all fly out of the hive and go up in the air, and you think, oh heavens, there goes my hive. And I have actually a video of that I shot one time. And then they'll go up in the air and they'll mate, and then she comes all back and all the bees come swooping back into the hive. It's pretty interesting to watch.
I bet it is. I bet it is. And I believe when we were talking earlier, you can also order through the mail a queen bee if you don't have one. And I guess, I don't know, how do you, I mean, if your queen bee dies, do they all just die? Or how do you know that you have a viable queen bee in there, or if you have to go put in an order for one and get her put back in your hive?
Well, that's where you have to watch bee behavior and their activities. And over time, you'll begin to understand when they're all sitting around. So if the queen dies, they're just lazing around the hive. They're not running in and out. You have another hive, and they're going in and out, and I have a hive that everybody's just kind of hanging around the hive. I think I have a problem, so I'll go in there and I search for the queen. That's a tough job. I like to see the queen in a hive, and I'll go through each frame, one frame at a time. Sometimes she'll jump from frame to frame, and I'll miss her, and then I have to go back through. If you have a big hive, that can take an hour or two, and it doesn't make anybody happy. It doesn't make the bees happy, and pretty soon you're not too happy either. They'll find a way to make you that unhappy. But so you kind of watch the hive. If you split a hive and one of them isn't working real well, then you can order a queen bee from a company, one of these companies I mentioned. They come in a little box that looks like a matchbox, and it has a little screen on it. And she'll be in there with 3 or 4 other bees that have all been fed, so they're feeding her. Sometimes they'll die. They'll kill themselves feeding her. And the U.S. Post Office will transport that. In fact, my wife went one time to pick up one of my queen bees, and the post office was terribly crowded. She had to stand in line forever, and eventually she got to the front, told them what she was there for, and there was a big gasp behind her, and they brought out this little tiny matchbox thing, and well, it comes in a little bigger box. And then she says, well, it was like the Red Sea parted when she walked out of there. Everybody gave her space.
They didn't want to mess with the queen bee there now, did they?
Yeah.
Well, very good. So I guess I'm going to go back to, because I'm really interested. I don't know if I have the stuff that beekeepers are made out of, but I am very interested in it. So you said about $150 will get you roughly a 3-pound bag of bees. How many bees make up 3 pounds of bees?
I never counted. Thousands,
okay.
I would say. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of bees and 3 pounds of bees. And you'll have a strong hive. And the other thing you want to do, you want that hive to start in late April, early May, or June. There's an old saying that goes like this, that a swarm in May is worth a bale of hay. A swarm in July or June's worth a silver spoon. A swarm in July is worth a poke in the eye.
Oh.
Because those are the months that the honey flows, and they have to have time. And in July, particularly here in the Midwest, we start drying out. The flowers are not the honey-producing flowers. They'll be more the pollen-producing flowers, which is used for the protein source for their grubs. So the honey flow ends about the end of July. So you need at least 3 months for them to build up. So if you start with a small hive, you want to make sure it's early in the spring. If you have a small hive in July, you'll be feeding that and hoping you can get through the winter.
Gotcha. So when it comes to harvesting honey, I mean, I guess it's all going to depend on the size of hive you have, but how do you know how much you can take, how much to leave? When is it time to harvest?
Well, that's there's more art to that, I think, than science. I like to leave 2 brood boxes. So typically there's a bigger box, and I will have that they make the brood, and they put the brood in there, and they lay the eggs, and bees naturally will put their honey higher and not put their brood higher. They put their brood lower. So beekeepers use that to their advantage, and then we'll put supers. So with a couple brood boxes, they typically don't go above that and start putting brood in with the honey. So then you'll have all the honey, it'll just be all lined up there. And I like to leave 2 brood boxes and 1 super full for winter, and I can get them through.
Okay.
So if I have honey in that second super, then I'm going to harvest that.
Okay, so what is a brood box?
Well, so these are just boxes with frames in them. I should have brought some pictures. And then you'll have a plastic foundation, typically today. When my dad did it, they would press wax and put wires in it, and then it'd melt down, and it was a mess. But that would get the foundation, would get the bees started, and they would fill that out with wax, and then that's where the queen lays her eggs.
Okay.
And that's why we call it the brood.
Mm-hmm.
So she lays her eggs lower, and those boxes are usually about 1 foot high, whereas when we put a super, we'll put a 8 or 9 inch tall box on top, and then the frames.
Super is where they put the honey at.
Right. The
Okay.
frames are smaller too.
Okay, and so if you have, I don't know how many supers you could have then in a hive. I guess it depends on the side, but you leave, based on your experience, 1 super always for the bees, and then if they start to fill another one, that's what's good for harvesting.
That's what I go after. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And then, I mean, how do you harvest? And then what do you do with the honey after you harvest it?
Well, it's kind of a process. You want to go and first you want to check and make sure they have enough. You look it over and see just how much they have. Sometimes they'll put it higher and then they haven't filled the lower box, so you have to check that. And then when you figure out how much you want to take, you're going to have to brush the bees off. And so I'll take a plastic tote and I'll pull out a frame and and I'll shake that frame and I'll get all the bees off. And of course they're flying around. They'll go back in. A lot of them go back down in the box. And when I get most of the bees off, I'll put it in this tote, slam the lid on it, and do the same thing till I get all the ones that I want or the tote's full. Then I take that. I have a little screened house, and that helps. So I take that inside my screen house, and then I have a extractor. That was one of the things that my father invested in, and it's a big tub that's about the size of a small garbage can, and it has frames in there. It has a cage in there, and you put the frames in. You can put 4 frames in. So you have to scratch the covering off of the hive. They'll cap those, so we scratch that off with a fork, or there's a scratching tool you can buy. And then we put that in this, close the lid and turn the crank, and centrifugal force slings that honey right out to the walls, and then it goes down into the bucket. And at the bottom there's a spigot you can turn on and off. You'll get some wax in there, so you'll have to strain that out.
Okay.
And so you'll have to, it takes me about a week to process it once I've harvested the honey and get all the little bits out. And then at the end of the day, I put it through a cheesecloth, a couple folds of cheesecloth, because there'll still be little tiny pieces of wax in there. And then I pour it up into jars and save it and sell it and give it for gifts and whatnot.
I mean, that's quite a process. You know, we see it, honey sitting on the shelves in the grocery store, and we don't quite think about it. And of course, that's processed honey, and they've got big, warehouses of equipment that they can roll that through. And I just marvel at the number of bees it probably takes to put that much honey on a grocery store shelf. Well, one bee
in its whole lifetime, if it's very successful and the honey's flowing well, will give you 1 teaspoon of honey.
Oh my goodness.
That's a lifetime accomplishment of 1 bee.
That's crazy. That's a cup of tea. If you think about the way that we use honey, and so one of the things that I've shared before anecdotally is that, if you have locally sourced honey, that helps with allergies, usually if you're within a 30-mile radius of the hive, because those bees are, bringing in the pollen that's going into the honey from that area. Now, there will be those that argue that, the pollen that they are bringing back to the hive is not what people are typically allergic to. They're just attracted to the bright flowering plants. I tend to lean towards the more holistic side. So I am a believer that locally sourced honey works, but it has to be a consistent thing, and you can't just take the 1 teaspoonful here and there. But I have to just call a spade and just say that science today is not really supporting that claim, but it's out there, and it is a potential benefit to those folks who do that. So it's one reason why getting your honey locally could be a really great benefit to you. Also, you're supporting local commerce. It's easier on the environment because you're not trucking it in. But beyond that, I mean, I don't know. The future is just really uncertain about honeybees and the pollination process and crops and all of that great stuff going forward. I mean, I know even now with the Holton Homestead, they share their bees, for a part of the year. They send their hives to Florida to help pollinate the almond trees that are down there just because there's not enough. From your perspective, I mean, it sounds like this process is not for the faint of heart, but definitely well worth it. For those individuals out there who might be considering taking on a beehive, what would be some advice that you suggest to them? And maybe it's if you want to say, what, we don't really need a lot of folks to have beehives, so I wouldn't worry about it, leave it to the farmers. Or how important do you think it is that more people support honeybees? And
bees do an awful lot of pollination, and other insects aren't necessarily picking that up as we see bee decline. So I think that's very important to keep bees, to keep them going. And yes, there's certain times of the year you can be very busy with bees. If they're doing their part and everything's working right, sometimes you just sit back and watch them. It's kind of like watching corn grow.
There you go.
Not that hard.
Yeah.
Let me just say one thing, Desiree. There's a lot of advantages to locally produced honey in the raw state when it's not been processed like you find in the store. And in fact, sadly, some of that store-bought honey, they stretch it with fructose syrup.
Yep.
But there is one disadvantage, and there's one thing about natural honey you need to know, and that is you really don't want to feed it to someone under the age of 2.
Okay.
Bees often are out in the field. There are bacteria that grow on the plants that they visit, and that bacteria can cause trouble with babies when their digestive system is still pretty young. So I always caution people, don't feed it to your kids. Don't feed natural honey to your kids under 2. But it's never caused any problems to anybody else.
And and that's good to know, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because that is a disclaimer that is out there. And, not having kids under the age of 2 anymore, it's easy for me to overlook that,
Don't
but
worry
very
about
important.
It, right?
Very important, because if you are looking at it as a health remedy, then you need to keep all of those things into consideration as well. So, wow, just a lot of ground covered today, and we're actually at the end of our time. So I think Dennis might have been a little bit worried when he first jumped on the show that he wasn't sure what to expect. But I told him things always fly by, and they go exceedingly fast. So where can individuals go if they are interested in starting their own hive? Is there like a website out there somewhere that lists different resources they can reach out to? I feel like some of the local community education programs do have beekeeping as a class where people can go and learn more about that as well locally. So wherever you are, I would check your community education opportunities and see if that might be there for you. I know in the Des Moines area, there are some of those opportunities here, but where else might people go if they're trying to find out more about this?
Well, Iowa does have, it does have some educational opportunities. They're usually on the weekends, usually on Saturdays, and I haven't taken advantage of those. But you can look on, I would just put Iowa bees or something like that and just buy Iowa beekeeping into your search. The other thing you can do if you're just looking for equipment or just start in on your own, like I said, there are a number of supply houses. There's one up in Minnesota that I've used quite a bit named Man Lake. And so just put in their beekeeping supplies and just start doing some research. There's a wealth of information out there. And it will always keep you humble no matter how many years you've been doing it. Your bees will someday do something you don't anticipate, but it's a lot of fun too.
All right, very good. Well, thanks so much, Dennis, and sharing with us and just educating us more about keeping bees. And also, guys, again, I'll mention the Holton Homestead. If having your own hive is not for you, but you really want to support bees in your area, I guess I should say in Iowa, or within 30 miles of Des Moines, check out the Adopt a Hive program. That would be a great way to support bee production of beehives, local honey, all of that great stuff. So I hope you have enjoyed today's show as much as I have, and I'll be at you again in the near future. So in the meantime, just remember, your body is a temple, so let's build it.